Throughout this channel's history, we've used cartoons to talk about philosophy. Now that this channel has turned roughly 3 years old, why not now use philosophy to talk about cartoons? But more specifically comics, because cartoons could imply animation. What are comics? How do they differ from other mediums? And at the end of this video, I'll make an argument for comics being one of the best forms of entertainment and interaction in today's world. So what are we talking about when we say comics? Well, unfortunately the medium is so broad and diverse that it's really hard to get a specific definition. Look at this first sentence from Wikipedia talking about how comics try to express ideas using images. Well, how does that differ from normal art when you see it in a museum? Usually some pretentious will try and say that art is more sophisticated and beautiful than mere comics. But compare any panel from Berserk to some examples of modern art and you'll see how this explanation falls flat. Therefore, it's kinda difficult to give comics a precise definition, but it helps if we could come up with some examples that fall under the category of comics. For one, we got newspaper comics. These are classic and old school with a couple panels either featuring a daily gag or an episode in an ongoing story arc. You got my favorite, Calvin and Hobbes, but you also got Peanuts, Pearls Before Swine, Foxtrot, Garfield. It's a form of comics that I actually do, with a set of characters engaged in different life scenarios. Next we got comic books, which are very superhero dominated, but not entirely. And related to this, we have graphic novels. I don't buy individual comic books, but I do get trade paperback collections, and I'm a fan of Batman and Ultimate Spider-Man. Graphic novels cover a lot more than just superheroes, and can be very diverse in terms of genre. You got Mouse, Sin City, V for Vendetta, but you also do have superhero stuff like Watchmen, although I wouldn't call Watchmen a typical superhero story. If you know, you know. Now this next form of comic may piss some people off because they think it's a separate thing, but it's manga, and manhwa for that matter. Now yes, manga does have many differences, but I think there are enough similarities to consider them comics, at least for this video's purpose. What I like about manga is that it's also very diverse with its genres, and they're usually longer stories. Yeah, there are single volume stuff, but many times you'll find series going volumes and volumes, and this could make collecting kinda fun or frustrating. I'm still relatively new to manga, but some of my favorites that I've read so far have been Berserk and actually the Evangelion manga. Our fifth and final form of comic is the political cartoon. I'm not too familiar with these personally except for the old works of Thomas Nast because I really like his shading. So those are our 5 big examples of comics that I can think of, and while they may not convey one unifying definition, I think it's a good start nonetheless. Now I want to talk about comics being compared to other mediums of escapism out there, like reading, movies, TV shows, and video games. Because out of all these other mediums, I feel like comics are generally the least popular. Now one way comics differ is due to pacing. In TV shows and movies, the pacing is set by the director. In video games, there can be some pacing out of your control, but a lot of it is based on your skill going through the game. With comics and reading, I feel like you get the most control over pacing. You could read slowly, speed read at a moderate pace, and comics actually allow you to stop reading and take in the art, which might make comics the most ideal for pacing control. Now let's talk about the immersion versus imagination spectrum. When we think about these means of escapism, they tend to vary as to how immersive they are versus how much of our imagination is required. Take a normal book for example. You read the words and have to imagine everything else in your mind. The immersion is rather low here, but the imagination is high. Compare that to a video game where you're transported into this world with sights and sounds, and you can even control someone living in that world. Video games and VR are arguably the highest on the immersion scale. Movies and TV shows I'd put behind video games, and comics would go right in between reading and movies. Because comics provide you with images that help with immersion, but you still don't know what the characters sound like. You still can't control a character like in a video game. So I personally feel that there's a good balance here between imagination and immersion. You have images to help bring you into the world, but comics still ask you to fill in those gaps with your imagination. Now let me make the case for why comics are the superior medium, the real big one. Yes, they don't have the immersion of movies or games, but they have accessibility. And by accessibility, I'm not talking about the ease of access to consume, even though it is pretty easy to access comics. What I mean by accessibility is one's ability to do it yourself. Now books and reading also have this advantage, with many people just opening Word one day and writing. But comics, man, I remember making comics with other kids when I was in elementary school. They weren't good, but they were still the best way to empty out my childhood mind of creativity. Not only because I could write the narrative and the dialogue, but I could also design the characters and location. I truly felt and still feel like I'm creating a world when I do comics. And it really doesn't take much. I mean, for me now, I opt for a drawing pad, which can be pricey, but I used to be pen and paper. It really is a medium that you could literally start doing right now. You got paper near you got a pen or pencil near you, boom, you can make that jump from just a consumer to a creator. It's harder to do that with mediums like movies, TV shows, or video games. But I'm not good at drawing, you might say. Hey, neither am I. Have you seen my videos? But it's not so much about turning out a Picasso as it is about emptying your head of all that imagination and creativity. Because I know you got a lot of cool ideas up there in your noggin that just fade away forever. Comics can easily capture up those thoughts though, and they can be as artistically detailed as you'd like. So that's my case for comics. It's a medium you can enjoy by consuming, but also by creating. And the consumption influences the creation, and vice versa. True, reading and writing books do the same thing in this regard, but I've never opened a book and got hit with something like this. Anyway, thanks for watching the video, and thank you for 3 years of Philosophy Tunes. We'll get back to our regular scheduled program after this, but if you want to tag along, then be sure to like, subscribe, and hit the bell. Let me know if you like comics, and if so, drop some recommendations. And I wish you all a beautiful rest of your day.